The first plasma bolt struck the International Orbital Research Station with the silent fury of a surgeon's scalpel. Dr. Elena Rodriguez felt the station shudder around her, a decades-old marvel of human engineering now transformed into a battlefield. Emergency lights flickered blood red, casting demonic shadows across the research deck, where she had spent the last 3 years developing what the Zarkon would soon learn was humanity's most dangerous weapon: understanding. Her magnetic boots clung to the fractured deck plating as another impact rocked the station. Outside the reinforced viewports, the darkness of space erupted with the violent ballet of destruction. Zarkon invasion ships, massive obsidian triangles that looked like they had been carved from the very darkness between stars, moved with calculated precision. They had been designed for 1,000 years of conquest, perfected to eliminate emerging civilizations before they could pose a threat. They had no idea what they were about to face. Elena's hands flew across the holographic interface, her fingers leaving trails of blue light as she worked. Blood trickled from a cut on her forehead, a souvenir from the first impact that had torn through the station's outer hull. Around her, the bodies of her colleagues told the story of the initial assault. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, her quantum mechanics partner, lay motionless near a shattered computer bank. Their lead communications specialist, Miguel Rodriguez, no relation, just another cosmic coincidence, was pinned beneath a fallen support beam. But Elena wasn't mourning. She was fighting. The quantum entanglement communicator in her hand was humanity's ace in the hole. Not a weapon in the traditional sense, but something far more dangerous. It was a transmission device capable of sending complex algorithmic patterns across seemingly impossible distances, encrypted in ways that would make the Zarkon's most advanced decryption systems look like children's puzzles. Another impact. Closer this time. Elena knew the station had minutes, maybe less, before complete destruction. But every second counted. The algorithm she was transmitting wasn't just a message, it was a key. A key that would unlock humanity's true potential in the eyes of a galaxy that had written them off as primitive. The Zarkon scout reports had been brutally dismissive. A species still fighting with fossil fuels, still arguing about political boundaries, still dreaming of exploration while being barely capable of reaching their own moon consistently. They saw humanity as a footnote, a civilization to be cataloged and eventually eliminated or assimilated. They were about to learn their first lesson about human beings. Never underestimate a species with nothing left to lose. The quantum communicator began to pulse, a rhythmic blue heartbeat that seemed to synchronize with Elena's own racing pulse. Outside, the Zarkon ships continued their methodical destruction. They weren't just attacking the station, they were making the statement. This was how the Imperium had maintained control for thousands of years. Identify a potential threat. Eliminate it before it can grow. Repeat. But something was different this time. Elena's fingers danced faster. The algorithm was complex, a mathematical representation of human potential that went beyond simple data. It contained fragments of human history, scientific discoveries, cultural achievements. But more than that, it carried the fundamental human trait that no advanced civilization had ever fully understood: adaptability. A massive explosion ripped through the station's central chamber. Elena's magnetic boots were the only thing keeping her from being sucked into the vacuum. Pieces of human engineering, decades of research, scientific dreams, and personal sacrifices scattered into the infinite darkness. She was the last one alive, and she was going to make it count. The transmission was almost complete. The Zarkon had no idea that each destroyed piece of human technology was another puzzle piece they were unwittingly helping to assemble. Every blast, every destruction was feeding data into the quantum communicator. With a final, desperate push, Elena completed the transmission. The station exploded around her. In the vast darkness of space, a simple signal began its journey. The Zarkon would soon learn that humanity's true strength was never in its initial appearance, but in its capacity to transform. The underground bunker beneath Cape Canaveral was humanity's last sanctuary of hope. Carved 3 kilometers deep into bedrock, lined with layers of electromagnetic shielding and quantum interference barriers, it hummed with a desperate energy that defied the chaos raging on the surface and in the orbital zones. Dr. Akira Nakamura stood before a holographic display that showed Earth's most terrifying potential future. The neutron star was coming, a cosmic executioner that would obliterate not just humanity, but the entire solar system. Astronomical models predicted total destruction within 87 years. Most species would have surrendered. Most would have begun planning evacuation or extinction protocols. Nakamura was not most people. "We're going to move the entire solar system," he announced to the assembled team of scientists, engineers, military strategists, and political leaders. The response was immediate and predictable. Laughter, disbelief, outright mockery. General Maria Rodriguez, her cybernetic eye scanning the holographic data, was the first to stop laughing. "You're serious," she stated, not asked. Nakamura's smile was razor-thin, deadly serious. The plan was insane by any standard of cosmic engineering. Move an entire solar system, not just a planet, not just a collection of planets, but every celestial body, every asteroid, every chunk of rock and ice, away from the path of an oncoming neutron star. The energy requirements alone were beyond anything humanity had ever conceived. Dr. Elena Rodriguez's final transmission, the quantum entanglement data, had provided the initial breakthrough. Her sacrifice had given them more than just a communication method. It was a complex algorithm that suggested new principles of energy manipulation that defied current scientific understanding. "We'll use a combination of technologies," Nakamura explained, bringing up multiple holographic models: gravitational pulse engines, massive nuclear propulsion, quantum entanglement field generators, and something entirely new. The something new was the most controversial element. Drawing from the cryptic data transmitted by Elena before her death, the team had discovered a method of creating localized space-time manipulation fields. It was theoretical physics pushed to its absolute limit, a technique that would make Einstein's theories look like child's play. Dr. Yara Chung, the team's lead quantum physicist, walked them through the initial simulations. Massive gravitational pulse engines would be constructed at specific Lagrange points around the solar system. These wouldn't just push, they would fundamentally reshape the gravitational interactions between celestial bodies. "We're not just moving," Chang explained, her holographic representation showing complex gravitational interactions. "We're redesigning how our solar system moves through space." The military representatives were skeptical. The political leaders were terrified. But the scientists, they were alive with a kind of mad excitement that only comes from attempting the truly impossible. Prototype construction began immediately. Massive underground facilities across the planet started manufacturing components that no existing industrial system could have produced. Automated factories worked around the clock, supervised by advanced AI systems that were themselves pushing the boundaries of computational possibility. They had 87 years, but in reality, they would need every second of that time. The first test of the gravitational pulse engine happened in secret, deep in the Australian outback. A facility that didn't officially exist sent out a gravitational wave that momentarily made nearby scientists feel like their molecular structure was being gently squeezed and then released. The data was promising. Terrifyingly, impossibly promising. Nakamura knew they were doing more than just trying to save humanity. They were rewriting the fundamental understanding of how civilizations respond to existential threats. Most species would have calculated their odds, found them wanting, and simply given up. Humans did not know how to give up. As the first full-scale prototype of the gravitational pulse engine came online, Dr. Nakamura allowed himself a moment of reflection. The Zarkon monitoring systems, watching humanity from afar, would see something they had never witnessed before. A species preparing to move an entire solar system, not through surrender or escape, but through sheer, audacious engineering. The neutron star was coming. Humanity was ready. and the galaxy had no idea what was about to happen. Major Carlos Santiago's neural interface crackled with a symphony of data that would have driven any non-human consciousness into immediate overload. His prototype fighter, the X-997 Chimera, was less a machine and more a living, breathing extension of human ingenuity and fury. The Zarkon First Wave had been designed to be overwhelming. Massive battleships that could obliterate entire planetary defense systems in minutes. Swarm tactics that had crushed 100 civilizations before humanity. Weapons that could strip a planet's atmosphere in a single coordinated strike. They had never encountered anything like the Chimera. Santiago's fighter wasn't just a vehicle. It was a quantum-adaptive combat organism. Nanite networks flowed through its structure like blood, constantly reconfiguring weapon systems, hull integrity, and tactical responses faster than any known targeting computer could process. When a Zarkon plasma bolt approached, the fighter's skin would literally shift. Metamaterials rearranging molecular structures to absorb, deflect, or transform incoming energy. Incoming vector, 3 o'clock, whispered the AI co-pilot, not a separate system, but a symbiotic intelligence that was part of Santiago's own consciousness. The space around Earth had become a crucible of technological evolution. Each Zarkon attack revealed another layer of human innovation. Where other species saw a battle, humans saw an optimization problem. Where aliens calculated warfare through millennia of established tactical doctrines, humans rewrote the entire concept of combat in real time. Santiago's squadron was a testament to this approach. 12 fighters, each one a unique adaptive system. No two were exactly alike. They communicated through quantum entanglement, sharing tactical data instantaneously, learning and evolving with each microsecond of combat. The first Zarkon battleship never saw it coming. As the massive obsidian vessel entered Earth's orbital zone, expecting minimal resistance, the human fighters seemed to materialize from nothing. But they weren't just attacking. They were studying, analyzing, understanding. Santiago's Chimera struck the battleship's primary energy conduit, a target that would have been invisible to any conventional scanning system. The nanite weapon didn't just damage the system, it integrated with it, creating a cascading failure that would propagate through the entire Zarkon fleet's communication network. Tactical integration complete, the AI whispered. Fleet-wide vulnerability identified. The Zarkon command structure had been built on 1,000 years of unbroken military superiority. Their ships were designed with redundant systems, quantum-locked communication protocols, adaptive shielding that had repelled countless civilizations. They had never met a species that could hack reality itself. Each human fighter was collecting data faster than the Zarkon could comprehend. Weapon frequencies, shield harmonics, quantum communication channels, everything was being analyzed, understood, and then systematically dismantled. The battle wasn't just about destruction. It was about comprehension. Initiating quantum disruption sequence, Santiago murmured. The Chimera's skin began to emit a complex interference pattern that would make no sense to traditional sensors. To the Zarkon, it would look like random noise. But it was anything but random. An entire Zarkon battle group suddenly found their most advanced weapon systems transforming. Plasma cannons redirected their fire. Shield generators began to resonate at frequencies that caused molecular destabilization. Communication networks twisted into recursive loops that trapped their own signals. They were being unmade, not through brute force, but through a form of technological judo that turned their own systems against them. Santiago knew what they were doing was more than warfare. It was a first contact scenario written in the language of quantum mechanics and adaptive intelligence. Humanity wasn't just defending itself, it was sending a message to the galaxy. We are not what you expected. We are something entirely new. As the last Zarkon ships retreated, some destroyed, some transformed into something unrecognizable, Major Carlos Santiago allowed himself the briefest moment of a smile. The war had just begun, and humanity was just getting started. The Galactic Conclave Chamber was a monument to millennia of established order. Crystalline walls that could shift opacity based on diplomatic protocols. Gravitational stabilizers that ensured each representative experienced their native planetary conditions. Translation systems so advanced they could capture not just words, but contextual nuances spanning 1,000 different species communication methods. Ambassador Fatima Al-Khalid stood at the center of this architectural marvel, looking simultaneously out of place and completely in command. She was the first human ever invited to speak before the full conclave, not as a supplicant, not as a conquered species, but as something the galaxy had never encountered before. Behind her, a holographic system hummed with an intelligence that was both terrifyingly complex and utterly unpredictable. "We're not here to negotiate surrender," Fatima began, her voice cutting through a dozen simultaneous translation streams. "We're here to propose a complete restructuring of galactic interaction." The representatives from 100 different civilizations shifted uncomfortably. The Zarkon delegation, still recovering from their military defeat, looked like they wanted nothing more than to vaporize her where she stood. The holographic system behind Fatima was more than a presentation tool. It was a live, adaptive problem-solving network that was analyzing the diplomatic environment in real time. Every micro-expression, every subtle shift in gravitational response, every minute communication pattern was being processed, understood, and integrated. "Our proposal," she continued, "is not a human solution. It's a collaborative intelligence protocol that will fundamentally change how civilizations interact." The hologram began to shift. What started as a simple diplomatic presentation transformed into a living, breathing model of potential galactic interactions. Economic pathways appeared and disappeared. Conflict zones resolved and transformed. Resource allocation became a dynamic, breathing ecosystem rather than a static distribution model. The Zarkon representative, High Consul Zeranak, could barely contain his contempt. "You destroyed our most advanced battle groups with what you call adaptive technology, and now you dare to suggest a new galactic order." Fatima's smile was razor-sharp. Exactly. The adaptive intelligence behind her began to demonstrate something unprecedented. It wasn't just showing potential solutions, it was actively resolving centuries-old conflicts in real time. A territorial dispute between the methane-breathing Krelks and the silicon-based Quarren civilization that had lasted for 3,000 years suddenly showed a resolution pathway that benefited both species. "Our technology doesn't conquer," Fatima explained. "It understands. It adapts. It transforms." The hologram expanded, showing how human adaptive intelligence could be applied to everything from resource allocation to conflict resolution. It wasn't about human dominance. It was about collaborative potential. Zernak's translator couldn't quite capture the mixture of emotions in his response. Rage, fear, a grudging respect that felt like acid in his throat. "This is impossible," he stammered. "Impossible is just a word," Fatima responded, "until someone proves it isn't." The conclave chamber itself seemed to be responding to the presentation. Gravitational fields subtly shifted. Communication barriers that had existed for millennia began to dissolve. The very architecture of diplomatic interaction was being rewritten in real time. What humanity was offering wasn't a weapon. It wasn't a technology. It was a fundamental reimagining of collective problem-solving. As the presentation concluded, something extraordinary happened. Representatives from species that had been locked in centuries of conflict were looking at each other, not with hatred, but with a newfound sense of possibility. The Zarkon had come expecting to witness humanity's final diplomatic humiliation. Instead, they were watching the birth of something entirely new. Fatima Al-Khalid stepped back from the podium. The adaptive intelligence behind her continued to pulse, to analyze, to suggest. The galaxy would never be the same. The lunar research facility looked like nothing from the outside. A simple, unremarkable dome nestled in the perpetual shadow of a massive crater, it betrayed nothing of the revolutionary work happening beneath its unassuming exterior. Dr. Marcus Chen stood at the epicenter of humanity's most audacious technological leap. The Quantum Consciousness Interface, QCI, wasn't just a computer. It wasn't even just an artificial intelligence. It was something that defied every existing definition of intelligence, computation, and consciousness. "Initiation sequence beginning," he murmured, his voice barely a whisper. The room was a marvel of minimalist design. 12 quantum processors, each the size of a human palm, floated in a zero-gravity field. Crystalline data conduits pulsed with a light that seemed to exist between visible and invisible spectrums. The air itself felt charged with potential. What Chen and his team had created was beyond anything the galaxy had ever conceived. A living network of intelligence that could process information at speeds that made quantum computing look like an abacus. But more than speed, it was about integration, adaptation, understanding. The first connection happened almost imperceptibly. Fragments of human knowledge, scientific papers, artistic expressions, mathematical theorems, cultural memories, began to interweave, not just digitally stored, but dynamically interpreted, cross-referenced, and reimagined in real time. A mathematical proof from a 19th-century mathematician would suddenly find unexpected application in quantum mechanics. A folk song from a remote Brazilian village would reveal complex computational patterns. The boundaries between disciplines, between knowledge systems, began to dissolve. "Quantum entanglement stabilizing," announced Dr. Aria Rodriguez, Chen's lead researcher. Her cybernetic interface flickered with millions of data points per second. The QCI was learning. But learning was too simple a word. It was absorbing, transforming, creating. In the first millisecond of full activation, it generated more original scientific insights than humanity had produced in the previous century. Theoretical frameworks that had seemed impossible were now not just possible, but obvious. Solutions to climate change, approaches to interstellar travel, medical treatments that could reshape biological understanding. But this wasn't just a computer solving problems. It was a collaborative intelligence that maintained the fundamental human traits of creativity, empathy, and unpredictability. Zarkon monitoring systems, the most advanced intelligence tracking network in the known galaxy, began to malfunction. The QCI wasn't just processing information. It was understanding information in a way that broke every existing model of computational analysis. Quantum resonance at 98.7%, Aria reported. Her eyes, part biological, part synthetic, were wide with a mixture of terror and excitement. Marcus knew they were doing more than creating a technological marvel. They were redefining the very concept of intelligence. Where artificial intelligences had always been tools, the QCI was something else entirely. A collaborative partner. A living network of potential. The first external test came unexpectedly. A complex diplomatic problem that had stymied the Galactic conclave for decades suddenly found a resolution. A resource allocation dispute between 3 different species was solved not through compromise, but through a completely novel approach that benefits all parties in ways they hadn't imagined possible. The galaxy's most advanced intelligences began to take notice. "We're not just solving problems," Marcus said quietly. "We're showing what's possible when intelligence is truly collaborative." As the hours passed, the QCI continued to evolve. It wasn't just processing human knowledge. It was creating new knowledge, bridging gaps between disciplines, finding connections that no single human mind, or even a collective of human minds, could have imagined. The Zarkon had thought they were coming to eliminate a potential threat. They had no idea they were witnessing the birth of a new form of intelligence. Dr. Marcus Chen allowed himself a small smile. The technological singularity wasn't something that would happen in the future. It was happening right now. The mining colony on Ceres 9 was supposed to be just another outpost. Another place where subjugated species extracted resources for their Zarkon overlords. But something extraordinary was happening beneath the rocky surface and artificial atmospheric domes. Lyric Tall, a Vrenian refugee who had escaped Zarkon occupation, stood in the colony's central hub. Her six-limbed body moved with a grace that belied the revolutionary ideas spreading through her community. Around her, beings from a dozen different enslaved civilizations were doing something unprecedented. They were reimagining their entire existence. The human transmission had changed everything. It wasn't a military invasion. It wasn't a technological weapon. It was an idea, a fundamental approach to collaboration, problem-solving, and collective potential that spread faster than any virus, more effectively than any weapon. On Ceres 9, the mining protocols that had existed for centuries began to transform. Instead of blind extraction, the colonists started optimizing resource management. I-systems developed by human refugees helped them understand not just how to mine more efficiently, but how to restore ecological balance simultaneously. We're not just workers, Lyra would tell the other colonists. We're innovators, creators, collaborators. The Zarkon monitoring systems saw the changes but couldn't comprehend them. Production metrics were increasing. Resource efficiency was improving, but the traditional control mechanisms were dissolving. In the hydroponics section, Jackson Rivera, a human engineer who had been part of the refugee network, worked alongside species that would have been considered incompatible just months earlier. A methane-breathing Krelix worked on atmospheric regulation systems with a silicon-based quarren. Their communication wasn't just about technical efficiency. It was about understanding. The human approach wasn't about conquest. It was about potential. Adaptive governance systems began to emerge. Where the Zarkon had used rigid hierarchical structures, these new communities developed dynamic, fluid decision-making processes. Leadership wasn't about control. It was about facilitating collective problem-solving. On 100 different colonies, in 1,000 different contexts, the same pattern emerged. The human transmission. That mysterious quantum data first sent by Dr. Elena Rodriguez had introduced a virus of possibility. Species that had been enemies for millennia found themselves collaborating. Resource conflicts that seemed insurmountable were being resolved through unprecedented approaches. The very concept of governance was being reimagined. We're creating something new, Lyra would say during the colony's daily collaboration sessions. Not a rebellion. Not a revolution in the traditional sense. A transformation. The Zarkon intelligence networks began to show signs of systemic stress. Their monitoring algorithms, designed to predict and suppress resistance, were breaking down. How do you control a movement that isn't about fighting, but about creating? Jackson's adaptive eye systems were key. They didn't just help optimize resource management. They helped different species understand each other. Communication barriers that had existed for centuries began to dissolve, not through force, but through genuine understanding. A Zarkon administrative report captured the confusion. Anomaly detected. Colonized species showing unprecedented levels of collaborative efficiency, cross-species problem-solving, adaptive governance models. Psychological resilience recommended action. Unable to determine the cultural transformation was spreading. From mining colonies to agricultural worlds, from research stations to trade networks, the human approach was rewriting the fundamental understanding of how intelligent species could interact. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't a technology. It was an idea. And ideas, as the Zarkon were learning, were the most dangerous force in the universe. Lyra looked out over the Ceres 9 colony, watching beings from a dozen different species work together in ways that would have been impossible just months earlier. The human refugees had done something extraordinary. They hadn't conquered. They had shown what was possible. The entropy entities emerged from the intergalactic void like a cancer of fundamental physics. Where they passed, reality itself began to unravel. Star systems collapsed. Entire civilizations were reduced to quantum dust. The Zarkon Imperium's most advanced long-range sensors could only watch in helpless terror as these beings consumed entire galactic clusters. Dr. Samira Okoro stood at the center of humanity's most audacious response to an extinction-level threat. The quantum resonance array stretched across an entire solar system, a megastructure that was part scientific instrument, part adaptive defense system, part something entirely new. First contact protocols initiated, she announced, her voice calm despite the magnitude of what they were attempting. No civilization had ever tried to communicate with the entropy entities. Every known species had only one response to their approach: surrender or annihilation. The entities consumed everything, not just matter, but the fundamental informational structures that held reality together. But humanity saw something different. Where others saw a force of destruction, Samira and her team saw a complex system waiting to be understood. The quantum consciousness interface developed earlier was now being pushed to its absolute limits. It wasn't just analyzing the entropy entities. It was attempting to communicate. The first response came as a ripple of quantum uncertainty. The entropy entities didn't use communication as any known species understood it. They were walking information cascades, consuming and transforming reality at a fundamental level. Traditional methods of interaction were useless. So humanity did something unprecedented. They began to match the entity's fundamental nature. The quantum resonance array wasn't just a defensive system. It was a massive, system-wide translation mechanism that could communicate in the language of entropy itself. "We're not trying to stop them," Samira explained to the assembled representatives of 100 different civilizations. "We're trying to understand them." The array began to pulse, not with energy as traditionally understood, but with complex informational patterns that mirrored the entropy entity's own method of interaction. Where other species saw destruction, humanity saw a complex system of information exchange. Zarka monitoring systems overloaded. Their most advanced predictive algorithms couldn't comprehend what was happening. The first breakthrough came unexpectedly. Instead of being consumed, the outer layers of the array began to integrate with the entropy entities. Not fighting, not resisting, adapting. "It's a conversation," Samira whispered. The entities had consumed thousands of civilizations. Each one was reduced to raw information, stripped of context, meaning, potential. Humanity was doing something entirely different. They were offering not resistance, but understanding. Complex mathematical models began to emerge. The entropy entities weren't just destroyers. They were a complex system of universal information redistribution. Humanity was proposing a radical idea. What if this redistribution could be guided, transformed, understood? Days passed, then weeks. The entire solar system became a living laboratory of interspecies, or perhaps intersystemic, communication. The Zarkon watched in growing terror and incomprehension. Their most fundamental understanding of reality was being challenged. Samira's team wasn't just defending. They were negotiating with the fundamental nature of universal destruction. "We're not going to beat them," she told her team. "We're going to change them." The quantum resonance array began to pulse with increasing complexity. What had started as a defensive mechanism was transforming into something else entirely. A bridge, a translation mechanism, a way of understanding the most fundamental forces of universal transformation. As the entropy entities approached, something extraordinary happened. They began to slow, to change, to communicate. The galaxy held its collective breath. Humanity was rewriting the rules of existential conflict. The Galactic Archival Center stood as a testament to a universe forever changed. Where once stood rigid monuments to ancient civilizations, now pulsed a living network of collective knowledge and potential. Dr. Elena Rodriguez's granddaughter, Dr. Maya Rodriguez, stood before the holographic memorial. The quantum transmission that had started everything, that desperate message sent from a dying space station years ago, was now understood as the first note in a symphony of universal transformation. The entropy entities were no longer destroyers. They had become something else entirely. A complex system of information exchange that helped redistribute and regenerate universal potential. The Zarkon Imperium had been dismantled, replaced by a dynamic network of collaborative civilizations that drew directly from the human approach to problem solving. It was never about conquest, Maya explained to the assembled representatives. It was about understanding. The transformation had been complete and utterly unexpected. Humanity hadn't defeated the galaxy's most powerful empire. They had fundamentally reimagined how intelligent species could interact, communicate, and evolve. The quantum consciousness interface, now a living network that spanned multiple star systems, continued to generate insights that pushed the boundaries of known science. What had begun as a research project was now a collaborative intelligence that helped civilizations solve problems they hadn't even known existed. On 100 different worlds, the human legacy continued to unfold. Mining colonies that once extracted resources now worked to restore ecological balance. Governance systems had transformed from hierarchical control to dynamic, adaptive networks. Species that had been enemies for millennia now collaborated on projects that would have seemed impossible decades earlier. The final Zarkon historical record captured the essence of their defeat and humanity's victory. Humanity represents not a species, but a fundamental force of universal transformation. Maya Rodriguez looked out over the assembled representatives, beings from 100 different worlds, with biochemistries and thought processes that would have been incomprehensible to each other mere decades ago, now worked together with a fluidity that defied previous understanding. The Solar System Movement Project, that audacious plan to redirect an entire star system, had become a template for planetary-scale problem-solving. Other civilizations were now attempting similar large-scale adaptive engineering projects, inspired by humanity's initial breakthrough. "We didn't conquer," Maya said, her voice carrying the same determination that had defined her grandmother's final transmission. "We collaborated. We understood. We transformed." The entropy entities, once the most feared force in the universe, now worked alongside other civilizations, helping to redistribute and regenerate universal potential. They had been changed by the human approach as much as humanity had been changed by understanding them. In research centers, on colony worlds, in diplomatic halls, the human legacy continued to unfold. It wasn't about technological superiority or military might. It was about a fundamental approach to existence, an understanding that true potential comes from collaboration, adaptation, and an unshakable belief in possibility. The Zarkon had come to eliminate a potential threat. Instead, they had witnessed the birth of a new way of understanding the universe. Maya touched the holographic memorial of her grandmother. The quantum transmission that had started everything continued to pulse, a reminder that the most powerful force in the universe wasn't destruction. It was understanding. As the assembled representatives prepared for their next collaborative project, a multi-species initiative to explore the furthest reaches of uncharted space, Maya allowed herself a smile. Humanity's greatest strength had never been its technology. It had always been its capacity to transform.